This is Pete Fletcher. On this episode of Around the Galaxy, we're talking to creature designer, that Yoda guy, Nick Maley.
No one had ever taken a puppet and made it a main character in a feature film full of non-puppet people. There was a lot of onus on us to try and be able to make this as believable as possible.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Welcome to episode number 152 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletcher. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey, if this is your first visit with Around the Galaxy, welcome aboard. I'm so glad that you can join us. And if this is a return trip, well, thanks for coming back week to week. As you know, the ATG Cast stream offers you a couple of different shows every single week. On Thursdays, you get this show, Around the Galaxy, where we talk to the people behind the fandom, whether they're Oscar-winning effects artists or best-selling authors or celebrity superfans, actors, or social media voices. We try to capture that magic moment when two Star Wars fans meet for the first time. And every other Thursday, you get Podcast to the Wills, hosted by my good friend Nick Maley, where he and a guest take a deep dive into a canon study of your favorite Star Wars movies or TV shows. And if you're an ATG Cast patron, there's a bonus because you get to be part of the live virtual audience when Nick and I record these shows. So for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to the recording of the shows, you'll get some swag, and you'll get early access to the podcasts. So check that out at patreon.com/ATGcast or hit join ATG on atgcast.com. But wait, there's more. On Saturdays, you get Disturbances in the Force, the weekly 5-minute Star Wars news digest. Look, there's a lot of Star Wars news going on, and it's like impossible to keep up with it. I know it's impossible because I try to do it every single week. But hey, give us 5 minutes and we'll give you the galaxy. No spin, no clickbait, just all the important news from the previous week. Oh, and we're not done yet. Finally, whenever there's new Star Wars content on Disney Plus, Nick and I are doing a live show on our YouTube channel called Streaming Star Wars, where we're talking about whatever was just on that week with you live in the chat. Then we take the replay from that show, and in case you miss it live on Friday, on Mondays, you can check it out. Well, that's a lot to take in. Maybe it would have just been easier for me to say, hey, keep up with us on all your social media channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at ATGcast. We're always letting you know what's hitting when and where, and usually we're engaging in that lively Star Wars conversation. Now, our guest this week is a gentleman named Nick Maley. Nick is a special effects makeup artist known for his work on Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. He's worked on over 53 films, including Superman, Highlander, and he was the special effects lead for Krull. He's sometimes referred to as that Yoda guy. He also happens to own a movie museum in St. Martin in the Caribbean. What a life. And he's written a book called Do or Do Not, 77 Steps to Living an Extraordinary Life.
Yeah, and speaking of an extraordinary life, have you forgotten about me over here?
No, I have not, ATG3. How are you doing?
Well, not very good, thanks for asking.
Well, I wasn't really asking, but do you want to tell me why?
Yeah, you know I do. Listen, I've been checking out that streaming Star Wars show that you do every week, where you talk about the content that's on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for the last 5 or 6 weeks, you've been talking about the Book of Boba Fett.
Yep.
And not once did you ask for my opinion. You had amazing guests,
yes,
but
we did.
never had me.
Yeah, okay. So here's your big chance. What were your thoughts on the Book of Boba Fett?
Well, now I feel like you're just pandering to me.
All right, well, let's just get to the show then.
No, okay, I'll go. So one of the things I heard you talk to your amazing guests about was all the great prequel references. You know, you had a Naboo starfighter, you had pit droids, you even had a rickshaw driver droid there in peril for comedic effect.
Right.
But not once did we get to see a single battle droid like myself.
Well, maybe they're all as difficult to work with as you.
Oh, that's nice. Well, here's our interview with that Yoda guy, Nick Maley, after these messages.
This is that Yoda guy, Nick Maley, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Nick, how are you?
I'm pretty good right now, thanks.
It's good to see you. Good to have you on with us. It's a real pleasure. So maybe give us like just a real quick 1 minute. Who is Nick Maley? And then we'll get into some of your history because you've got some great stories to tell.
Yeah, that's true. Well, people call me that Yoda guy because of pictures of me assembling the radio-controlled version of Yoda that was in Luke's backpack when he was doing somersaults on Dagobah. But in fact, I was part of the team that built Chewbacca and the Wampa and the Tauntaun and the Mynock and the Ugnaughts. And in fact, I designed the Mynock that spat all over the Millennium Falcon. That's another story. And I worked on 60-odd other movies and as well. So it was a journey. It started in 1969, so I'm fearful to say that was 52 years ago. I don't know what else to say about that, but I'm not just a creature effects guy. I do a lot of other things. I'm a motivator. I do talks motivating people to follow their dreams, to be all they can be. I'm a museum curator. I'm an author. I'm an artist. I wrote music with a band in Idaho. It's as I was saying earlier, I don't believe in the word retirement. I think we just evolve it from one element of our life into another, and hopefully I'll still be making things when I'm 105.
I love that. And I think, there's something about I did some freelance writing, and I've been a freelance writer for a while. I've gotten into podcasting. I do graphic arts and I play music. And it's funny. I think that there's a certain creative drive for certain people like yourself, where there's some sort of spark in you. And maybe we could start with your book and your motivational speaking, because I think that's a really interesting part of who you are, because people, like you said, you're right, people call you that Yoda guy because they've seen the photos. You have the museum, which we'll talk about, but you're also you've taken what has driven you and you've tried to share that with others. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, what it's really, as I say, life is an evolution. And so having, made 60-some movies, I went and spent some time in the Caribbean. And while I was there, I'm a creative guy. I felt that I needed to be creative. And so, I sat in the garden and tried to create some paintings that captured the essence of spending a year out on the ocean, pitching my wits against whatever nature might throw at me and trying not to drown my wife. And that got me almost incidentally into being an artist in the Caribbean and owning 3 galleries. And that just sort of evolved very easily. People say you can't make a living as an artist, but actually I can't tell you how easy it was in comparison with being a kid from the projects trying to break into making movies. And, along the way, I guess I formed some fairly definite opinions about what it was in life that created success, and what it was that really satisfaction was all about. What is success? Those kinds of issues. And as I say in a lot of the advertising, I traded my Ferrari for a sailboat, but that was just, again, the beginning of a new episode. In doing that, the cruise ships kind of picked me up because of the work that I'd done in the movies, and started to tell people that they should come and see me. And so for a number of years, about 15 or so years, people would come and seek me out. I don't know that it was that they wanted to buy a painting. I think maybe they just wanted to pick my brains. And often I found that I was talking to young people particularly, but older people too, about the really answers to the questions that they asked, which really brought out that philosophy that I didn't really know I had until they asked the questions. And so as time went by, every time I said something to someone that I hadn't really thought of or said before, I just noted it in my computer. And eventually I had a whole list of of issues that I reorganized into my little book of big ideas, where I encourage young people to follow their dreams, be all they can be, and try to give them a manual on how to keep going on a daily basis to get through this very difficult period of not being distracted. You know, the truth of the matter is, if you want to do something extraordinary, it's not going to be easy.
Right.
That's why they call it extraordinary. And so if you expect it to be easy, then you're going to be disappointed. I can't tell you how many people come in and say to me, oh, yeah, I went to school for film. You know, I studied film. That means they invested 3 years of their life.
Right.
And a whole bunch of money, and but it didn't work out for me. And I say, well, what did you do? Well, I went to California and I hung out in Hollywood for 18 months, but it didn't work. Well, that's because you didn't put in the other 10 years, right? Going to college is the easy part. Being unemployed is the hard part,
Right.
Struggling to get through, first of all, getting to know people who are going to give you the opportunity, and then getting enough of that opportunity to actually make a living. And so, the book is really not related to entertainment. It could be related to doing anything which is a difficult task that's going to take time. And it's really intended to give someone a nudge on a daily basis to help them keep moving forward. Because if you can get this much closer to where you're trying to go every single day, then eventually you'll get there. And that's the bottom line. Most people, they come up with an idea, they say, that's what I'd really like to do. And then they get distracted. They got to do something for their wife, and they got to buy a new pair of trousers, and and they were interested in watching that thing that was on TV, and they got to answer all that social media, and they got to do their podcast. And you know what? A year goes by, 5 years go by, 10 years go by, and they say, "Oh yeah, I used to want to do that." Staying on track is the hard part.
There's sort of this instant gratification world that we live in as well, which probably doesn't help people with that reminder that you're talking about there. I think that's critical. I think that's great. So how did you...
There's actually a lot of, when you're talking about that, social media and instant gratification, that is largely part of the problem that comes from being influenced by all the people that are around you. When the people around you are not working as hard as you wonder why you should be working that hard. When the people around you are being more interested in playing games or in doing other things, or they expect everything to happen quickly, well, then you take on that same attitude, because it's normal to want to fit in with your friends, and it's normal to take your standards from your friends. But no one ever explains to people that another word for normal is average. And average people get killed in video games. You have to make up your mind. Do you want to be normal? Do you want to live an average, ordinary life where your life is no better than anybody else? Because if you do, that's fine. Go hang out with your friends, do what they do, and nothing special will ever happen to you. You won't have any risk of that happening. But if you want to make a mark in the world, if you want to have a life that is much more varied, well, I'm sorry, but you can't be normal and extraordinary. You've got to be one or the other.
So you had to work very hard to do 60 plus films. One of your the first things you worked on was with Charlton Heston. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so you did multiple movies, and then let's talk a little bit about Star Wars. Stuart Freeborn contacted you to work on A New Hope. Is that right?
Not quite.
Okay. It wasn't that easy.
No. Once I managed to persuade the guys who could give me a union card that they should do that, The second major hurdle, that was the first major hurdle. Second major hurdle was in getting onto a team that worked regularly, and especially a team that was doing the more creative stuff. And there wasn't that many people that you could pick out. People, let me just say this in the meantime. People often completely overlook the fact that Star Wars was made in England.
Right.
The principles were all plotted out in California, and the post-production was done in California, but all the principal photography was done in England for every single Star Wars movie except Episode 2, and that one was made in Australia. And so there were not that many people in England who were going to get, those real cutting edge jobs. And Stuart was really at the top of that list because he had a history of doing character effects, prosthetic makeups going all the way back to Oliver Twist in the 30s, coming through movies like Doctor Strangelove to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was in many ways the birth of modern animatronics. I mean, animatronics, as we talk about it, is people in mechanical suits, and often they didn't have any electronics in at all. None of Stuart's creations had any electronics in. They were largely muscularly driven from the actor within, which was unusual. Most other creature effects guys, create movements that are running on cables and exterior controls. Stuart really focused very much on it coming directly from the performer. But there had been people in the 30s, like Charles Gamora, who had done some of those early ape suits that had the essence of it, but not as sophisticated as what Stuart was doing. So getting back to your question, basically, I stalked him for a couple of years. Yeah. In my little book of big ideas, I say, if there's an obvious route between where you are and where you want to go, whatever you do, you shouldn't take it, because it's guaranteed that there's going to be a million other people who saw the same thing and are standing on the same road. And as soon as there's a million people, there's someone employed at the other end of this queue to send all those people away. And so what you need to do is look sideways and see some guy in overalls who's got a key to the back gate and offer to carry his bag. And that's basically what I did. I looked sideways. There was Stuart. I stalked him. I knew I would sit next to him at union meetings so that he knew who I was. I would show up at the studio and be in the canteen so that I could sit down and have a conversation with him, just so that when he got to the point where all his friends, all the people that he would normally work with were busy, and he looked at the list of people he hadn't worked with, my name would stand out amongst that crowd. And so eventually, 1971, he offered me 2 days' work on a movie called Young Winston, about Winston Churchill when he was young. And it was 2 days of beard work for the Houses of Parliament in 18 something and another. And one of the things that I practiced when I was unemployed, rather than sitting and watching the TV all the time, I would always try to hone my skills. One of the things I'd spent hours and hours and hours doing was I got one beard, and I would keep curling it into different styles and different period things. So my 2 days turned into 16 weeks, and we went to Morocco and filmed there. And I became a good friend of his son, Graham, who's an unsung hero of Star Wars, and really created a lot of the characters that people know in Star Wars, but no one ever talks about him. And then, later on, I was Graham had a reputation because he was Stuart's son, and some of the jobs that were smaller jobs, Graham would get those jobs, like effects commercials. And he asked me to do a job with him in the effects commercial where Donald Pleasance was drinking beer in a pub with Frankenstein and with the Mummy and with Quasimodo and with all these different horror characters, And so I helped Graham with that. And then when Stu needed more people on this strange little what we thought was going to be, for kids film called The Star Wars. Right. He recommended that to his dad that I should, come and be the new guy on the team. I had worked with Stuart before, but not doing creature effects, purely doing straight makeups. Or character makeups, but two-dimensional, and so it was that ultimately I started with Stuart on A New Hope, and the rest became history.
So when you first started working on Star Wars, it's funny. I think that, and I've said this quote before, and I know I'm getting it wrong because I can't find the original quote, but I know I read it somewhere where Ralph McQuarrie, when he shared some of the conversations with George after the paintings, he was like, "There's a good chance this stuff isn't going to look great on screen. Like the stormtroopers just happen to look amazing, and all the different creatures from the cantina." What was your initial thought when you got called into this? Because I think you said on one of your videos on your channel, which by the way is if you're a Star Wars fan, you have to go to your YouTube channel because you've got tons of great stories there. But I think you were saying, science fiction movies were, B movies at the time. What was your thoughts when you started working on this project?
My thought was, hallelujah, I'm working. And I'm working on a creature, on building creatures. I mean, the truth of the matter was, as I said in a couple of recent videos on the channel, none of us really knew who the hell George Lucas was. And so we weren't impressed to be working with him at all. Right. We were impressed to be working with Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing. And in fact, I don't know how many of those videos that we got there you were watching. In fact, they only managed to get the three Americans in on that by reversing the character list, because Equity which is the actors union in England, is very defensive of films being made. They want people in England to get the work, not to keep importing people from other places. And so, if Burt Lancaster's coming in to star in a film, they realize, well, they'd better let him in because he's going to sell the tickets, right? But Harrison, who is this guy, and Mark, what did you say his name was, they were all unknown. And so who was going to let them in? So what the executive in charge of production actually did was he reversed the whole actors list and said, starring Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing and all these other people. And, we've got these 3 little Americans playing this little part down the bottom here.
That's great.
And that he was doing he was one of my guests, so he told that story, and I thought that was such an interesting thing.
Yeah.
What did I think? This is a movie in 1976. We made this movie. I know it came out. Everybody says 77, but it was 1976 when we made it.
Yep.
And this is a movie about gunslingers and wizards in space. I mean, who the hell was going to take that seriously, honestly, at that point in time? Science fiction was, people thought of things like The Blob and movies that were being made really pretty cheaply. Young people don't know what a B movie is because they haven't had any for a long time. But B movies were how they persuaded people. You're going to go to the cinema and you're going to see 2 movies. You've got the A movie and you got the B movie. And the B movie was a support, which to some extent was a filler, and meant that people sat in the cinema for about 3 hours, because now they make single movies that last almost 3 hours. So it can be the same thing. For that reason, all the major studios were turning Star Wars down. Because number one, they couldn't see how it was going to be made. And number 2, they couldn't figure out how it could be afforded. Yep. And 20th Century Fox was the last studio anyone would go to for funding because they were virtually bankrupt. And so they weren't going to put up a lot of money for anything.
Wow.
And that's actually why Star Wars ended up in England, was because the budget wasn't big enough to make it in the US.
Wow. Right. And so, like you said, most of the principal photography was done in the UK. And so it was a lot of I guess because the principal photography, most of the filmmaking action was there. That's where most of the creature creation and special effects were done. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, there are drawings of various things that, that have come out of the woodwork over the last 40 years. But a lot of them we never saw. And a lot of them are also misinterpreted.
Right.
You got to remember that everything that is in the archive is looked after by an archivist who wasn't there.
Right.
And what that is largely information that was written by journalists for magazines, and they were only there for maybe one day.
Right. And
the questions they asked were based on information that came from the press department, and they weren't there either. Right. The people who, if they didn't ask the right questions, they didn't get the right answers. And so I think a perfect example of that was about Frank Oz being the puppeteer for Yoda, which he was. He was the key person in the creation of Yoda's personality. But Frank was already famous for making the Muppets with Jim Henson.
Right.
And so the publicity department wrote about Frank because he was already famous and he was publicity worthy. And so everybody who came talked to Frank. And then they went away and they all wrote about how Frank was the puppeteer, the voice, and the puppeteer for Yoda. But no one seemed to really even stop for a moment and think about the fact that if this is Yoda, this, by the way, is Yoda naked. If this is Frank's right arm, then this is Yoda's neck, and this is Yoda's jaw, and this is Yoda's eyebrows, and these are Yoda's lips. So this actually, on this other side, is Yoda's left hand, or Yoda's cane, one or the other, which was always in his left hand. So who's operating his eyes? Who's operating his eyelids? Who's operating his ears?
Right.
Who's operating his right hand? You know, there were 4 puppeteers that operated Yoda, 3 or 4 depending upon the shot. And it wasn't until the 90s when the internet came around and I started writing about those other people who were involved in creating Yoda and also in operating Yoda, that they got any credit at all. It was, and at the time, we were breaking a lot of union rules, and so the credits that they gave us at the end of the movie were rather misleading. They were what they could get away with rather than what was really factual.
Right.
I mean, on the first Star Wars, it's kind of interesting. I didn't get a screen credit on the first Star Wars because I was a lowly member of the team. And in those days, really, we were still at a time where only maybe 2 or 3 people in a department got a screen credit. Superman was the movie that changed that.
Okay.
Superman was the first movie that had, like 10 minutes of credits at the end.
Right.
And the reason for that was that, the line producer figured out that they could save £200 a week on a crew of 400 people by saying, well, agree to this and I'll give you a screen credit.
Okay.
And everybody wanted to see their name on the screen, right?
Right.
So they all worked for less money just so that they could sit at the end and see their name go up, right? And after Superman, lots of people got credits on movies. They figured it out. So on Empire Strikes Back, I did very, very little makeup, but I spent most of my time in the workshop building creatures, working on the Wampa and the Tauntaun and the Mynock and the Ugnaughts, and as well as Yoda. But I get a credit as in the makeup department, I was just doing straight makeups on those guys in the background.
Right.
Because we were makeup artists who were upsetting the plasterers because we were making molds, and we were upsetting the sculptors because we were sculpting creatures, and we were upsetting the props department because we were making puppets, and we were upsetting the special effects department because we were building mechanisms. And so to get around all of that, the line producer suggested that we should have a new branch, and it should be called something fancy like animatronics. Right. And that's how animatronics as a word got applied to movies.
Wow. And so what role did you play on the Yoda performance? You said that you were the radio control when he was on Mark Hamill's back, and you also.
I'm gonna correct that.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
At that point in time, we were not allowed union-wise to operate puppets.
Got it.
And that was how the Muppets got involved. The Muppets were making the Muppet Show 15 minutes away in another studio in the same outreach of London, and so it was easy to say, well, let's ask them to come, and because they'll be used to things that are built in a more delicate way than maybe the guys in the props department or the special effects department. And so I didn't operate anything on Empire Strikes Back. I was the guy who was making things work. And we had a lady from the Muppets called Wendy who came and joined us, who was a key contributor to the building of Yoda, and built the bodies and sculpted the hands and the feet. I was initially there. We thought it was going to be one Yoda, and Stuart was building him. And his son and I were building the Wampa that hits Luke in the face at the beginning of the movie, and the Tom that he rides, and other prosthetics for the Ugnaughts and other things. And so I thought all I was going to do was work with Yoda. I was going to prepare to make the molds, which is to take the sculpt and line it up to be able to cast it in sections. And then Stuart and I cast the exterior, and then I continued to cast, to reverse engineer to make the plunger that later on becomes the skull. And so that's all I thought I was going to do on that. And I made the skins because I was the guy foaming all the foam latex. So, I was making Yoda skins and his hands and his feet. And that's what I did on the prototype. But then they decided that, they were worried. I showed you, I said, this is Yoda naked,
Right.
Just like a Muppet, they were afraid that they would only ever see Yoda walking around. You'd never see where his legs were, right? You never see that, right?
Right.
So they said, well, we need a walking Yoda. And Stuart, they'd spent so long deciding what Yoda was going to look like, and that's a completely other story. But they spent so long doing that there really wasn't enough time to build the world's first animatronic superstar. You have to understand, Star Wars did a lot of things that hadn't been done before. In the first movie, it was largely in the way it was filmed and the way that it was put together. I think it was the first movie, certainly in England, it was his first movie in Sense-Around, where you had sounds coming from the back of the cinema as well as the front, and of course, the way that they filmed the ships and all of that stuff. But when we got to the second one, there was, no one had ever taken a puppet and made it a main character in a feature film full of non-puppet people, right? And so, there was a lot of onus on us to try and be able to make this as believable as possible. And Stu was really struggling with this really fine mechanism that he was building. And so they came to me because I, by that time, was the senior guy left in the workshop. Graham had, we'd started filming, and Graham had gone down on set to be the chief makeup artist and look after the actors down on set. And so I was the guy in the workshop. And so they came to me and said, can you figure out how we can get this shot? We want a shot of Yoda walking. And Stuart says we haven't got time to make an animatronic walking Yoda. And so I said, well, why are we talking about an animatronic walking Yoda at all? I mean, no one knows how tall these trees are.
Right.
So why don't we make an oversized Yoda, put it on a little person, and he can walk through the trees?
Right.
And I could do that in a week, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the first one that I made. I made the head. The costume obviously came from the costume department. There were some people in props, I think, that made the hands for that version. And we had a little person called Deep Roy, who become really famous doing other things as well. Because I'd done that one, and they were pleased with me. So when they said, well, what about a radio-controlled version that could be in Luke's backpack? I said, well, I at that time, I didn't know a lot about radio control. I know a lot more now. But I said, look, I'll work with the guys who are doing the radio control little robots, and I'll do all the finishing. I'll put the skin on. I can do all of that, because the backpack version was for mid to long shots, not for close-up reactions. And so every time you went in for a close-up, that would have been one of the close-up puppets, and Frank would have had been squeezing into Luke's backside, basically, to do that. So that was why they, that seemed to be, perfectly good. And that was the only electronic version of Yoda. And then when the close-up puppet started filming in Yoda's hut, the mechanism wasn't as perfect as Stu would have liked it to have been. And so he was standing by all day to make sure that if it broke down, he could fix it. And then he was working all night to try and make sure it didn't break down the next day. And then he was working all day to make sure he was there to fix it. And then he was working all night to make sure it couldn't. And, after 3 days, they came to me and asked me if I could build a backup. That was the puppet that I stayed and built, and that was the one that lifted the X-Wing out of the swamp and said the classic lines, "Do or do not, there is no try." It wasn't a sweet mechanism, but it didn't break down.
How many Yoda puppets were there in total?
Well, close-up puppets, there were 2.
Okay.
And then there was the radio control version, and then there was the guy in a suit. So Stu took his prototype. He had time to fix all the problems between the movies. He put a new skin on it, and that is the prototype, which is in Yoda's hut, is the version that you see in Return of the Jedi. And I can actually tell your viewers how they tell the difference between the two puppets. It's really pretty easy. If you look at the puppet in Yoda's hut, you will see that he has rather sleepy eyes. They're kind of half closed, and often they're a little crossed.
Okay.
That's because there was a mechanism inside to be able to change the focus of the eyes, and Frank kept bumping it with his hand, and so it would be like that, or they'd be like that, and so often they're a little crossed, and he has rather ugly teeth. In fact, in the chat rooms, they tend to call that version evil Yoda, because he does look a bit mean, right? And the version that I built doesn't have sleepy eyes; they're not crossed, and he has a kinder expression, and no ugly teeth.
No.
So just get your DVDs out and stop in the middle of the scenes, and you will immediately know the difference between the two.
Now, you also said you did the Minox, which I find really interesting, because that was just like one of my first memories of a jump scare when they jumped on the window there. How much freedom in the design did you have with that versus, was it a blueprint that you were given, or how much did you get to be creative on that? No, I just
made it up as I went along. Actually, for the Minox, there were 2 of us that were involved, myself and Bill Hargreaves in the props department. I read the sequence in the script where Carrie looks out the window and this head comes down and slobbers on the screen. And so that's what I was making, right? Right. I kind of assumed that, Minox flying around would be an optical that they put on afterwards. Right. It's in a dark cave, who's going to really see it anyway? Right. So I made the puppet version, which fitted on a guy's arm. And I wanted to make something that was really weird, because a lot of the stuff that Stu designed was what I would call terrestrial. You know, there were kind of rat creatures and bat creatures and fly creatures and, you know, other stuff that was really very, very actually terrestrial. I wanted to make, I'd seen in the first movie how George had kept on picking out the weirder looking things.
Right.
And so I wanted to make something that was really weird. So, you know, it was going to slobber on the falcon, so I made it a kind of suckery thing, like a sucker fish.
Right.
Gave it these blobby eyes sticking out the side. And to make it look really weird, I made it look like the neck and the head were all kind of melting, like it was made of something that was dribbly. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the head came out. And then later on, I discovered that Bill was building a body that, you know, that supposedly represented the rest of the Minoc, and he was swinging them on wires, you know, around the set to finish that off. So
that's pretty cool. Now, I don't. How much of the more recent Star Wars stuff do you keep up with? Are you still a fan of some of the more recent films?
I've seen all the movies. I've seen all the movies. But to be quite honest, I saw the first series of The Mandalorian. I thought it was good. It was a little too Clint Eastwood, but it was good. And I haven't seen the rest of it because where I am, I don't know. I just didn't want to subscribe to Disney Plus for one show. I'm listening to most of the other stuff. Now that we've got 3 shows, you know, I think it's time for me to subscribe and, you know, see the rest of it. But I saw all the new movies.
So as an original creature designer, what was your take on Baby Yoda, on Grogu? Did you, because he is also a fully animatronic creature for the most part, of course, you know, now I don't need to tell you, but people listening, they do a lot of CG sort of augmentation. But how did you respond to seeing a Baby Yoda?
I thought it was very smart on their part. You know, I have this image of them saying, okay, we're going to make, you know, this show. It's going to be called The Mandalorian. And there's all these writers sitting around in a room, scratching their head saying, but what are we going to make it about? You know, and someone saying, you know, oh, it would be good if it was, you know, goes back to the idea of the gunslingers and who's the best gunslinger? Well, that would be Clint Eastwood and A Fistful of Dollars and whatever else. So, you know, that's our measure for it. So, you know, that's what that first series, you know, largely was.
Sure.
And then someone saying, yeah, but we need something that's more alien and other stuff. And, you know, someone, you know, you need something cute. And someone says, oh, but we could put Yoda in it. And I'm saying, no, Yoda's dead. We can't put Yoda in it. You know, it's not in the timeline. And someone going, oh, right. Yeah. What would be cuter than Yoda? A baby Yoda. Right? I mean, it's like, you know, knocked it out of the park. I mean, it was just brilliant on their part. And I thought that the guys from Legacy Effects did a really good job of bringing that to life. It's difficult when you're working with a 14-inch figure. Yoda was 26 inches, so you could get an arm in it. You can't really get an arm in 14 inches. You could get maybe a hand in.
Right.
You're not going to get much, you know, out of that. And I thought that for the limitations of being a mechanical figure, that it worked pretty well.
Yeah.
And I was pleased that it was physical and that we didn't just resort to more cartoon characters.
Yeah. No, it's I think it makes all the difference. And in fact, I think that's one of the charms of Star Wars is when you can almost tell that it's a special effect. It's a puppet. It's an animatronic thing. The physicality of it works in Star Wars. I think it kind of adds to the charm of the world. So by doing it that way, I think they were able to maintain sort of also that spirit of the creatures you were a part of, which is pretty amazing.
And as things have gone along, they've tried more and more and more to incorporate those. And I'm sure that I talked about Bill Hargreaves. He also put together IG-88 from bits of dismantled aircraft that they bought, and so he I'm sure is doing well, signing stuff now that they brought IGs back into The Mandalorian.
It's funny too, because now that it is, Star Wars has become something that actually benefits from the nostalgia. You see now, if IG-88 came back in every movie, people are like, yeah, we get it. But now that the IGs are back in this new timeline, it's just people are excited to see it. So so now
and I think that the thing that to my mind was the best thing in The Mandalorian was that it's a series made by fans, effectively, and so they get what it was that the fans really wanted. And a lot of the guys who are the older guys who were not happy with the prequels and were not happy with the sequels, instead of us losing those people, well, they don't like what they don't like, but The Mandalorian has kept them in the fold. And so that pleases me. I'm seeing Star Wars fans literally every day of the week. So most Star Wars aficionados, Star Wars veterans, let's call us, or as some people call us, Star Wars alumni, are going to do conventions at the most every weekend, probably once a month or 3 times a year. I created my own venue, and so I have Star Wars fans walking in the door literally every day. I know what they like and what they don't like, and I know how it changes through the ages, the age groups of those people, whether they were caught in the Star Wars net when they were 7 years old in 1977, or whether when they were 7 years old in 1997, or which age group. And so I was disappointed that we were losing a lot of people from the sequels. But I'm very pleased to say that all of those people who don't like the sequels like the new TV series.
And you see Star Wars fans every day because you have a museum, and was it in Phillipsburg, St. Martin in the Caribbean, correct?
Yeah, I live in the Caribbean. Someone's got to do it. You have to sum these things up. Let's see. Do I want to stay in the Caribbean in the sunshine and drink pina coladas? Or do I want to stay in England, pay high taxes, and stand in the rain?
That seems like a pretty... Yeah, I think you made the right choice, yeah.
Yeah, and often Americans will come in and they say, why are you here? You'd make more money if you were in Florida. I say, yeah, it would be really good if I competed with Disney World. Here I am. I'm in the Caribbean. I don't have any competition for 1,500 miles. People make a pilgrimage to come and see me, right?
Yeah.
And as far as Trip Advisor is concerned, we are the #1 most popular activity in the country for 7 years in a row.
Amazing.
So I'm here most days, not every day if I'm going off and doing a convention, but it's unusual for me not to be here. Usually I'm working in the back, working on computer, I'm writing stuff, and I'm doing my videos to go out and other things, but I'm here to talk to people. And we have this museum that is full of relics, not just from Star Wars, but from lots of other movies too. And this is the only place too that has some of the original scripts from the classic Star Wars trilogy that Lucasfilm collected at the end of the production.
Wow. So what kind of things do you have on display at the museum?
We've got everything really from Baby Yoda through Darth Vader, Yoda, Han Solo in carbonite, to Michael Jackson and Humphrey Bogart, and lots and lots of famous people, not wax images like Madame Tussauds, right? But the actual life cast that we took off the faces of those actors to do different effects at different times. So, we got Angelina Jolie and Tom Cruise, and as close as anyone's going to get to Johnny Depp, and other people. And we got stuff from Men in Black and Harry and the Hendersons, and other movies too.
That's fantastic.
And of course, my movie, we've got stuff from Highlander and Krull too.
Right. Yeah. I was gonna ask you a little bit about those. That was it's those are just like those classic 80s movies. I love those films. What was outside of Star Wars? Because I'm making an assumption that Star Wars was probably one of your favorite things to work on. What was some of your favorite films that you worked on?
Well, Star Wars was something that if I could only make one movie, it would have to be Empire Strikes Back. Right. Because it actually was that turning point that took me from being, the first Star Wars was the turning point that got me to the point where I didn't have to worry about whether I could pay the rent anymore. Right. Right up to Star Wars, that was a major concern. But the Empire Strikes Back was the movie that, because of the work that I did on Yoda, people suddenly knew that I was a real maker rather than just some guy who worked in Stewart's department. Right. And so that changed what happened. By the time we were starting on Return of the Jedi, I was being offered head of department on other movies like Krull. And so it was time for me to go off and do that. Right. And Krull was without doubt the happiest movie that I ever worked on. Yeah. Although I have very fond memories of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I did with Anthony Hopkins. Basically, that was hard work and we were understaffed, but he was just such a wonderful guy to work with that he just made the job a real blessing. And it was as a result of that, every big thing comes from a small thing. It was as a result of me working with Graham on a commercial with horror characters that took me to Star Wars, that actually took me into Star Wars. It was working as the head of department designing Quasimodo with Anthony Hopkins that took me to a $40 million movie called Krull. And that was the first big budget movie that I designed all the creatures for. Yeah. There were some drawings that were done by Stephen Grimes, who was the production designer. But like, for example, the Beast in that movie was like a skinny gray guy with red eyes. And I did keep the gray and I did keep the eyes, but I redesigned everything else in by adding all the details and all the, the fine point that made him what he was. And the same with the Cyclops and with the Widow of the Web and various other things. And I had a young team because I was afraid that if I had an old team, they'd look at me and say, "Aren't you that new guy? What are you doing in charge?" Right? So I had young people that started with me and went on with me to other things. People who now our junior on that, who was 16 years old, was David White, who went on to do Guardians of the Galaxy, and now is one of the guys who decides who gets the Oscars. On Life Force, one of the 16-year-olds was Steve Norrington, who directed Blade, and my runner is now a producer for Steven Spielberg. There were a lot of people along the way that started as young people with me, that went on to find careers.
That's amazing. It's interesting. Every time I'm lucky enough to speak to somebody who has the experience or a similar experience to you, it's always interesting to me that just sort of the farm system that the studios and people, especially in anything effects, it seems like that's where you hear about these young guys who are sort of an assistant in a shop, and they're now Oscar-winning directors and things. And it's interesting that's that sort of creative piece, and you've had
today. I was talking to someone today. They were saying, "Oh, my daughter really wants to, be a creature effects artist, and she's thinking of going to such and such a school to do, what, and that's the school that she thinks is probably going to be, the best." And I say, well, everybody who's a legend in creature effects didn't go to school for it.
Right.
None of them went to school for it.
Right.
Not one. Right. Basically, if you want, here's what it comes down to. When I was young and I couldn't get, much work, I taught at university. As soon as I got enough work, I stopped doing that.
Right.
College is somewhere, and sorry to all the college professors that are out there, but college is somewhere. Either the people who don't want to take the risk of being in a freelance industry, or the stress of the competition, or that have gone through a great career and are now in their latter years and don't want to take the stress of making the movies, so they get to take a leading role at a college or whatever else. Those are the people who teach at college. Right. The cutting edge people are too busy doing the job. So ultimately, the issue is the best education that you can get is to stalk that guy, offer to work for nothing. And I have had people who said, "Oh, I don't like the idea of working for nothing." So you go to college, you work for nothing for 3 years, and they give you a bill.
Right. Exactly. You get to pay to work.
Offer to work for nothing. And I'm going to tell you, if you're worth anything, within 3 months, they'll give you a salary.
Yeah.
And don't take no for an answer. When they say, "No, I'm sorry, we don't have any openings, we don't need anybody," make sure that you're by the front door when they arrive every morning. And eventually, they'll at least invite you in for a cup of tea. You can start sweeping the floor, and you're in, right? You're there.
That's great.
Never take no for an answer.
I love it. And it's one thing to have advice like that. It's another to have lived it. And I love hearing your story. This has been so much fun. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at thatyodaguy.com. You can find me at nickmaley.com. You can find me on YouTube at Nick Maley, that Yoda Guy.
It's all about branding, right, Nick?
You can find me on Facebook as Nick Maley. You can find me on Facebook as that Yoda Guy movie exhibit. I really, actually, you can find me just by putting Nick Maley into Google.
Right. I think that's the easiest way to go. Nick, this has been a real pleasure, a real treat to, as I was saying before, just to hear these kinds of stories. It's a real pleasure, a real treat. And like you said, if people are in the neighborhood in St. Martin, go to your museum, check it out. You're probably there unless you're at a show.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is when you decide that you want to get around to go cruising again, or if you're already at that point, make sure that you pick a cruise that goes to St. Martin, because we're the only place in the world with resident Star Wars veteran available without it costing anything to get in. Our museum has a lot of relics and other things in. It costs $15. You can't get into a convention for $15, let alone anything else. So come see me, and we'll talk a bit more.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thanks to Nick Maley, and thank you for listening. If you had fun, please like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it. Follow us on all your social media channels at ATGcast, and head on over to our website, ATGcast.com. Or, if you really like, you can become an ATGcast patron by visiting patreon.com/ATGcast. The show has been copyright 2022 Pete in the Seat Studios, and our music is brought to us by the band Silver Colored Knob, who can be found on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your tunes. Well, that wraps it up. May the Force be with you. Roger, Roger.